Welcome to Shadow the Stereotypes podcast. I'm your host, Coach Michael Taylor. The intention of this podcast is to showcase men of color who are doing amazing things in the world. You see, there's never been a lack of Black male role models. There's only been a lack of exposure of those role models. So my job is to showcase and shine the light on the men who are doing some amazing things in their communities and around the globe. And so joining me today is Ahmad Mansur, and he's a leadership futurist, educator, coach, and speaker. He advises companies, startups, governments, colleges, and universities on big shifts and global trends impacting the future of learning, talent, and economy. So it is my honor and privilege to welcome Mr. Ahmad to the show. How you doing today, Ahmad?
I'm doing very well, Coach Michael. How are you?
Oh, fantastic, man. Really looking forward to this conversation. And you are definitely one of those brothers who are shattering the stereotypes. And before we get into your professional life, we want to just ask a couple of icebreaker questions. Just
Sure.
to know Ahmad just a little bit. So first of all, where are you from?
I'm from San Francisco, California. I consider myself to be a San Francisco kid. I'm a true San Franciscan. And if you're from the Bay Area, you know exactly what that means.
Now, I just noticed that they've just elected their first female African-American mayor. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And she grew up in the same neighborhood that I did.
Oh, how about that?
Which is the Fillmore. And if anyone is familiar with the arts and Black history, everyone knows that the Fillmore, not everyone, but folks know that the Fillmore was considered the Harlem of the West. Where a lot of great artists came. There was a lot of great Black businesses. And also they were, as much as great as that sound, they also were a community that was a target of cities' urban renewal the bad way. And if you take any urban planning course in America, they use the Fillmore as an example of how not to do it.
Wow. Wow, hadn't heard that story. So next, so tell us a little bit about your family, whatever you feel comfortable with.
Sure. Well, with my family, I have 6 sisters, 3 of which are I guess we call half sisters, and it really takes me back when you gotta call your sisters half sisters or step sisters, but you know, for the sake of showing how that division of labor took place. So I grew up with 3 sisters and I have a brother, and my sisters are pretty much scattered all across the United States, some of which work in government, some who are entrepreneurs, and some who work in private sector with some of the larger technology firms. Yeah. So
now I'd like you to name a woman who has inspired you to become the man that you are today.
Wow. Well, as soon as you said that, what came to mind, I'm just going to say a woman by the name of Sister Katherine.
Okay.
And Sister Katherine was important to me because as a young kid, I was a somewhat mischievous. I started off in public schools, and during my time in public schools, as much as I was a pretty good student, I was someone who didn't follow directions very well. So I was actually taken out of public schools and put into a Catholic school. And Sister Katherine, who saw that I could have gone one way or the other, she pretty much laser focused in on me, created a pact with my parents so I couldn't kind of, use the gap between the day and the evening to create division, and she pretty much helped me get back on track. And so there are numerous women who I could name, but she actually comes to mind.
Sister Katherine,
actually had on my life.
Okay, now name a man who you admire and respect.
Oh, by far, my uncle Ronnie. Okay. My uncle Ronnie was. He was the youngest of 5 kids from my grandmother. And so we're closer to age because he was further down the line. So, and also when my family moved from Ohio to California, he was probably the first one to really kind of move into the middle class. I mean, he had kind of that perfect corporate job with the vehicle that came along with it. And he used to invite me down to his place, and he had a beautiful wife and kid, and he used to invite me down to his place in the summer times. He lived in Fresno at the time. And because I grew up in an urban setting, and all of a sudden I was in kind of this less urban setting, I just had an opportunity to bond with him and for him to really show me that anything was possible as far as how our family showed up in California and in the world.
Huh. Nice. Now, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
I would say patience. I think that I would say have more patience and let your patience show up in a number of different domains, one of which is financially. When I look back at my 20s, I wish, or if I look back at my 20-year-old self, I would have opened an investment account, been very modest in what I put in that investment. And then over the years, up until the age that I am now, if I just took that particular investment account, I would probably have over $1 million in that right now, or even more. And so from the sense of financially, and I learned these things from some of my very close friends who are, my very close friends who are in the finance business, and they're financial professionals, and I saw them speak to others about this, and I really found this to be something that I wish I did much earlier. Another aspect of patience, I would say, is in my 20s. When you're a Black man, and I didn't talk a lot about my mom and dad, and I kind of went right to my sisters. But my mom, by the way, my mom was a hardworking nurse, and my dad was an educational professional, and they split when I was, I guess, about 8 years of age, and because of that, I think that when I went to college, I felt like I needed to jump right into the workforce and kind of be very ambitious, as very industrious Black working class families expect from you. And if I had to look at my 20-year-old self, I probably would have taken that time to explore, to experiment, and to what I tell a lot of young men and women now, to really run into yourself along the way.
Okay. Now, I want you to imagine that I'm going to give you this magic wand. And with this magic wand, you can create anything your heart desires. If I gave you that magic wand, what would your life look like 10 years from now?
Well, that's a great question. I would take that wand and I would create space, like some type of center that was a hub for innovation and human and talent development. And inside that space, it would be designed for learning. It would be designed for exhibition. It would be designed for people to have a voice and knowing how to cultivate themselves so that they can actually go out and have impact in their world and their community.
Good vision, really good vision. Now, there are some people who are pessimistic about the future, and there are others like myself who are extremely optimistic. So where do you fall on the spectrum between pessimism and optimism for the future in general?
Sure. Well, Michael, as you know, I'm a trained futurist, and so I see the world of possibilities. Being a futurist is about really allowing us to move from what we call your official future, which is really based on your life experiences. It's kind of like one projection, and really expanding that out to seeing what's possible. And so when I look at the future, when I look at the possibilities, whether I'm using my academic lens or I'm using my kind of my emotional self, I'm actually optimistic, but I'm optimistic only because of my own sense of self-agency around what could be created about the future.
Okay, all right. So now let's jump into your education. Of course, there's this negative stereotype about Black men and learning, and you've got a list of degrees. So I'd like you to just kind of share some of those with the audience.
Well, this is funny because I'm happy too, but it's so funny because there's always this feeling that comes up because I'm a brunt of a lot of jokes from my friends who say, "Man, how many degrees?" Man, I stopped counting the number of degrees. So that's kind of a running joke when they're introducing me to someone, and it's all in good fun. So yes, well, first of all, I'll say that my education was a learning journey.
Okay.
It was a journey in itself. It was a journey because, and I think this is something that young people can learn from, because we are kind of catapulted right into the four-year college world. That's what we're inspired, and our families want us to do. We want to do. For me, it was kind of simple. I wanted two things. I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to play basketball. It was, and I wanted that to be near a beach, and that was like a major criteria. And when I went to my counselor and I told her that, I went to I went to a top Jesuit prep school in San Francisco. It was kind of where a lot of the old school leaders of the city and of the state. Actually, our governor here, Jerry Brown, who I used to actually work for, he and I went to the same high school, St. Ignatius College Preparatory. But when I was there, the expectation for you to go to a big school, it weighs on you. And so for someone like myself who talked about being near a beach and playing basketball and not really looking at aspirations that were any higher than that, my counselor actually called my parents. And when I told him that and said that something's wrong with me. So, but nonetheless, I stuck to my guns, sort of say. And so I started off with the University of Hawaii, believe it or not. And then I left there and went to Long Beach State in Southern California, and where I got my undergraduate degree in interdisciplinary studies. And then I thought I wanted to do a PhD right afterwards. So I went to Atlanta and enrolled at Emory University, only to find out that I wasn't ready to do that. So I kind of pulled back and went into the workforce. And then later, I went back and got my graduate degree, my MBA in leadership at St. Mary's. But it was in leadership, but there was something still missing for me. I wanted to kind of take a deeper dive into the adult experience, from a standpoint of learning and the mind. So I went back to school again and got another graduate degree in adult learning and development from San Francisco State University. And that wasn't enough. Then I ended up becoming a research fellow with the Aspen Institute, which is kind of one of our top think tanks, in the country. And I focused in on leadership and regional economies. And they convinced me to actually go back and enter into a program at Harvard, an executive program, a graduate executive program at the Harvard Kennedy School. And from there, I got a graduate certificate in leadership, and I studied with Ron Heifetz something called adaptive leadership, which is a model for for change and transformation. And along the way, I've always stayed connected when I do my work, even if I'm employed or if I'm self-employed. I always stay connected to some type of fellowship that allows for me to stay academically focused from a research standpoint, so that I'm always on the leading edge of what's going on in my field.
Nice, very nice. Now, let's talk about your company, Future Point. First of all, I'm curious, what does Future Point mean, and what exactly does it do?
I love explaining what Future Point means. Well, so there's a couple of things I'll say. So our tagline is "Find Your Point," and that means a number of different things. And that is that in the world that we live in now, we live in a very complex economy, a very complex environment that's driven by technology and exponentialism and a lot of things that makes it very difficult for us to navigate in this space. It's, there's a business school that calls it constant whitewater that we're in here. So Future Point is about how do you look out into the future and have the capacity to look out at what you want to envision for yourself, for your company, for what you want to change and have impact with. So how to actually look out at that. And then we say that Future Point, the company, then develops your capacity by giving you the tools and practices to march towards that future. And part of it is doing exactly what we talked about before, and that is imagining a future outside of the official future that we have a tendency to look at. For us, if I said, Michael, so what do you want to do in 5 years? You could probably plot that out. And if you and I sat down, I can I can bring forth 3 other different futures that would be equally as compelling for you to look at. And so as a company, what we try to do is to design programs. We create a portfolio of brands. We design programs and workshops for corporate, but also for governments and communities, where we do facilitation, we do leadership development, and we have specific programs, one of which I'm designing right now. It's called the Next Leaders Program. And that program is actually for college-age students who can develop their capacity and develop their talent to be viable in a global economy. And so this is kind of an experiential program that we're doing. And then we have something called the Talent Lab Project, which is both a website and a podcast, and also an actual design space where we work with leaders who actually want to solve problems inside their institutions, driving innovation in their space there. So Future Point is really it's a platform which trains and develops leaders on how to engage through the lens of innovation to impact their organizations and their communities.
Now, do you also work with individuals that in coaching them to possibly support them in maybe creating a vision for their lives as far as where they want to be in the future?
Absolutely. So thanks for mentioning that. So we have something called a Pathfinder Program. And actually one of the chapters, I know you're going to get to this, but one of the chapters in a book that I'm writing is called the Pathfinder's Manifesto. And I actually got stuck in that chapter because I took a deep dive in speaking about what it means to be on a path of development when you see the future that you want, and how do you develop that capacity to get there. And it's really based on a talent model that I designed that says that there are essentially 6 domains of development around talent. one of which we call it the path, and that is actually, finding your path through experimentation. And then we have, so we have the path, we have what we call skillfulness, developing interdisciplinary skills, leadership, mindfulness, develop your network, and then develop the economy of self. And so those are kind of the 6 domains that we have designed around the cultivation of talent from a personal standpoint, as it has an impact on communities, on work, on family.
Yeah. Now, I read on your website, you had a brief little intro to Pathfinder. It says, cultivating the talents of the Pathfinder to become the self-author of their life world experiences by developing their purpose, mindset, skill set, leadership, and economy at the edge of change and transformation. I really like that. I really like that.
Thank you.
So I'm looking forward to that. So let's jump real quickly into your book. So you've got a book coming up. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So my book is really based on my passion for really looking at the future of how we end up cultivating talent. The book really takes all of my experience that I've had in education and economic development and economic and workforce development. And really what I do is that I take the experience and I couple that with the fact that for a year, I was a fellow I was a presidential fellow at the Saybrook University, in which they funded me to actually go around the United States, go around the world, and really see what's happening in our economy and what's happening in communities with regards to work, the future of work, and the future of work. What came out of that for me was a slogan that I use, which is, the future is talent, not work. And so what do I mean by that? Well, everyone heard of the term, the future of talent. The future of work. We pretty much know that whether you're a policymaker, a company, an individual, everyone's trying to figure out, with the onslaught of automation and machine learning and exponential technologies, that the jobs of the future will not be the ones that we have here now. Actually, by 2022, about 40% of the job titles that are currently in the workforce space will not be here. And we also know that we're moving more towards a free agent economy, where 40% of our workforce are now contract workers, and that's going to continue to accelerate. So you have all these different things that are taking place in the economy that's impacting communities that have traditionally counted on certain types of work. And those communities, whether you're looking at ethnic communities, a lot of people don't realize that during the industrial period, a lot of ethnic groups really centered their work interests based on work affinities. And so you had a lot of, African Americans that went to the industrial north to do manufacturing and they went out west to do shipbuilding. That's why we have Black folks here in California. You have, you kind of have your white Irish kind of immigrant groups that went towards not only manufacturing, but also the civil service. And that's why if you look at a lot of our sectors, like fire service and policing, there's a very strong Irish influence there. You can feel it, and it's also within the traditions. I can go on, and I will not. But my point is that the industrial economy gave us a sense of comfort around job availability and the abundance of jobs that were available to us, really based on our ethnic affinities. And so there's, and it was good for us because it allowed for a lot of African Americans to really move into the middle class. and become solidly part of the middle class. But when you look at the future of work, the question becomes, how do we go by cultivating talent and not focusing on work? Because work, I'd like to remind people, Michael, that work is simply an act of it's an act of production, okay? And work has been fairly indiscriminate in its application, meaning that work could be everything from, sweatshops in Bangladesh to, slavery in the early part of our history to being a great artisan, to being a computer software programmer. Work really doesn't care about how it's done, it's all about the output, it's about production. So what's happening right now in our economy is that work, in the workspace, productivity is beginning to decouple from wages. So it used to be that, and I'm going to put my hand up here, but if you go back to the 1940s, work and production was like this. So you had a good wage and the wage was kind of connected to production. But now it's being decoupled, where the wages are going like this and production is going like this. And that's because of automation. So you're beginning to find that you're having high skilled and low skilled because of that. And so, but what we do know, and I'm sorry for taking this long, giving you a long answer here, but what we do know is that what we do know is that talent has had an upward mobility, meaning that in the knowledge age, our ability to cultivate our talents, learning certain technical skills, learning creative production, actually has an upward trend in our economy, and it's going to continue to. And not only has an upward trend, but it also gives you more of a freedom to be mobile because of the knowledge-based capacity of it. And so really, my work and my book is really about, this is a long way of going there. It's really about what do we need to do? And it's really a commentary and a perspective along with some research around what do we need to do to answer the call to how to go by cultivating talent in this economy in a way that really looks at it in a very broad perspective. And so I'm hitting on different topics in that. And
do you have a title for your book yet?
I have a working title. It's called The Talent Economy. The
Talent Economy.
Yes.
Right. We're going to be looking out for that one, and make sure once you get it out, I want to get you back on the show.
Absolutely.
Let's dive into it a little bit. So that'd be great.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Were you complete on what you were about to say?
Absolutely.
Okay. Right.
You know what happens, Michael?
Yes.
When you know this because you're writing a book, it's like you have so much information.
Oh yeah.
And it's kind of like all in here, and so and if you get even a hint of excitement with it, you don't really know what you want to say about it. You want to put it all on the table here. So I was working hard to really kind of keep it in line here for you.
I feel you, trust me. as an author, I feel you. I know exactly where you're coming from. But I'm glad we touched upon that, because I think that's really important, especially in the Black community, because what I hear you saying is that, there was a time when if we didn't have higher education, we could rely on manufacturing and labor-intensive jobs to move into the middle class. But as robotics and AI and things like that start taking over, we've now got to make a shift from doing things with our hands to doing things with our minds.
Absolutely.
We've got to embrace these changes and understand that in order for us to keep up, we've got to tap into our talents.
Absolutely.
We've got to take a deep dive into understanding and commit to never-ending improvement and learning, because things are changing so rapid. I think a lot of people may not recognize, and again, I'm an optimist. That's just a
sure.
But things are moving rapidly, and I personally believe for the better. But in order for us, especially as men of color, the one thing that we have to focus on, I believe, is this whole idea, and I think you kind of touched upon it in your Pathfinder quote, that we've got to make the investment in ourselves to learn, to grow, and to change.
Absolutely.
So that, I think that's absolutely critical. And one of the ways that I try to do that is by sharing information like we are doing today, so that men of color recognize that, yes, we are keeping up with the trends. There are a lot of us out there that are in the leading edge. So I'm really glad to have you here talking about some of these things, because whatever your perception is about race relations and America and all that, the world's moving forward with or without you.
Well, first of all, I'm enjoying being on this show. And if I didn't mention earlier, I'm so happy to be here because the invitation for you really means a lot to me. So I really appreciate that. And I just enjoy the work that you're doing here.
And I'm just as excited having you on the show, because
Great, thank
you inspire me. Because when I see men like yourself who's done some amazing things, which we're actually going to talk about, see, what I know is that we need to get these stories out there so that young men of color listen to us and hear and soak in some of the wisdom that we're putting out there.
Absolutely.
So it is my pleasure and honor to have you on this show so that you can share your wisdom. So that's a great lead into, you led a national project initiative called Expanding Business Engagement for the U.S. Department of Labor. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I used to work for a firm called Social Policy Research Associates, and I was a senior associate there. And one of the projects that we had a major contract with the Department of Labor, and the assistant secretary, I won't kind of go into it because it could get kind of nerdy here, but departments of labor, they really run a lot of these different national initiatives to actually help kind of develop strategies for growth in regional economies and in the states. And so they come up with these different initiatives in which they lead, and I had the good fortune of leading that particular project. And it was a project where 15 states in the United States had an opportunity to receive funding from the Department of Labor to put together a group within their state, and that group was a group that was appointed by their governors. And these were business people, to really look at how, as a business, whether you're corporate, small business, we had a kind of a diverse range of enterprises. How can you better engage local and regional communities and local and regional economies to help close the gap around jobs and essentially around jobs and around work. And what happens is that in regional economies, we're extremely inefficient in our relationship between business, educational institutions, and kind of like government funding mechanisms. And so that, there should be a tighter, what we call a tighter trilateral relationship. And those relationships are not that great. And so this initiative was set up to actually develop the capacity of these leaders to engage differently with these local communities. And so part of my job was to work with all 15 states. We held online meetings. I visited each state where we had workshops, and we even designed an institute and toolkits and all those different things to really help. And actually, I believe that particular project is still online. So you can actually go, and I don't know the website, but if you put in, what is it? I always get this wrong. It's enhancing business engagement? What is it?
Well, it said expanding business engagement.
Expanding business engagement. You know what? I've had that problem from the time I was working on it. I would literally be on a project, on a call, and call it expanding or enhancing instead of expanding. So, but that is available online, including some of our workshops and a lot of different resources That was the whole intention, was to make it where businesses could then have these tools available if they would want to use those.
Nice. Now, you recently gave a presentation at the University of Texas.
Yep.
And actually, my son graduated from UT. Go Horns.
Okay.
And it was titled
Congratulations.
Inclusive Innovation. So what was that about?
Yep. Well, first of all, being a Californian, I had to reckon with the fact that that I actually like Texas. I actually like, UT is great. I love UT, and also my niece plays volleyball there. She's a volleyball player there. So it was a pleasure to go there and work for the office of the president, and to give this talk around inclusive innovation. Now, inclusive innovation. So I do a speech that's separate for this, called what I call Moonshot Colleges, and it's really based on this idea of inclusive innovation. So this discussion was about how can universities, which are really under they're under some tough challenges right now, because there are a lot of people that saying that if you take the cost of colleges along with whether the students that are graduating, whether they are whether they have the skills or whether they're ready for the workforce, that colleges and universities perhaps may not have kind of the traction and value and signal that they once had in the past. Well, and that's to be debated. I'm not here to say yay or nay of that. But what I can say is that that colleges and universities really need to look at how they can be more purposeful in their mission. And so what inclusive innovation is about is how can you take a university, and especially like a UT, and all of its resources, and come together in a very interdisciplinary way to really solve some of the most intractable, tough challenges that are in a community. Now, it's interesting because we actually live at a time right now, Michael, where you were talking earlier about optimism. There's really not a problem that we can't solve, literally. I don't know whether you could fully say that 25 years ago, but today, there's literally not a problem that we can't solve. And so part of that capacity to solve thorny problems, or problems that are multi-directional and they're messy, is that they're complex, is that you have to bring a very collaborative, multidisciplinary approach towards it. And so we call that inclusive innovation. How can you bring all these different resources to close the gap and be more inclusive in the communities that you're serving? So for example, like at the University of Texas, one of the things I mentioned to them is that, and Texas does a great job with getting a very broad, diverse range of students there. But there are challenges in, and I may get this wrong, I think it's East Austin, where you have communities where that the achievement gap needs to be closed, or there's some challenges with their ability to be competitive. Now, what we've used in the past is obsolete, and I don't really have a lot of faith in those. And what I do believe is that if we allow ourselves to bring people from the neuroscience departments, the business schools, the ed departments, the engineering departments, the humanities, and when we get them into one space, and then we bring entrepreneurs and corporations into one space to really start kind of taking a deep dive in a very strategic way on some of these problems, you can solve them.
Yeah.
So that's what inclusive innovation was about when I spoke there.
Now, I noticed that you used the word moonshot.
Yes.
And I'm a huge fan of a guy named Peter Diamandis.
I think you and I talked about that before. That's where the term comes from.
Yeah, is that okay?
Yep.
Yeah, because I really believe, and he basically says what you were just saying, that all of the problems on our planet can be solved. It's just a matter of getting the right people together and getting enough people to agree how to solve them.
Absolutely.
And so it's conversations like this, I hope, that spurs people to just start imagining that, yes, we can solve the problem. Because I firmly believe that it's possible.
Yes.
And as a matter of fact, I'd say that it's inevitable.
Yes.
So,
if we can stick here just for a second. I mean, I think when you look at things like, we were talking earlier about mindset. I mean, what we know about the mind now, that's what I mean when you're talking about neural and cognitive sciences. It's one thing we do know is that, the mind, and that's why I went back and got my graduate degree in adult learning, because what I learned was that the mind is actually has more plasticity than we ever thought it did. And so, the way you learn, the way you address issues and see in the different lenses, we have the ability to change our brain and our level of consciousness. There's a way that we can actually rewire that. And so when you look at it from a mindset standpoint, and then when you look at it from a standpoint of how you get all these different people together, but that's around design, and one of the things that we've really advanced in is that the design principles that once went into creating great structures and products, we've now been able to move into a design space where people can design a path and a process to actually start solving problems together. And so we have a lot of these different things that are tools and practices and methods that really gives us a chance.
Now, again, I'm really impressed with your resume and the things that you've done. I'm glad we've had the opportunity to kind of share some of the things that you've done. So I want to shift the conversation just a little.
Sure.
And so, as a man who happens to be Black, I'm sure there are times when you've been in a meeting or a seminar and you've been the only man of color in that space. How do you deal with that, and how does that make you feel?
I deal with it in many different ways. First of all, depending on what mood I'm in, so I grew up in the Richard Pryor era, right? So sometimes when I'm the only Black man, in the room, I can run a lot of kind of Richard Pryor humor in my head. It's like, and so some days it's just like funny to me because, I may be saying under my breath and in my head is like, like all these damn white people, I mean, something like that, but then there's other days when, you're paying very close to some of the comments that are made and knowing that those comments a lot of times is a reflection of the lack of interaction, with men of color. And also, since we're talking about shattering stereotypes, some of the stereotypes that have been embedded, into a lot of different communities, just not white, just a lot of different communities that don't have the opportunity to interact where those stereotypes are shattered. And so there are times when I look at that and those meetings become almost like a sociological kind of anthropological experiment for me as I'm looking at that. And then there are days when I'm just in the mood where I just want to, be a marauder, where, I just don't have time. And so the way I'm engaging people is kind of no nonsense. And so I don't think there's really one way, but I can tell you one thing, it never stops me from my mission.
There you go. Yeah, that's the key. Now, I'm a big movie buff, and I don't know if you've seen the movie Get Out.
I have not seen it yet, and I'm probably the only brother in America that has not seen it.
You gotta see the movie, but there's a line in the movie where the main character says, when I get around all white people, I get a little nervous. And the movie is really powerful.
Yeah.
But, I think as men of color, we've all had that experience where we walk into an environment and it's almost, I can speak for myself.
Sure.
Well, I feel like the people that are looking at me, they see a stereotype. They don't see me.
Yep.
They see this black guy. They don't know what to expect, but most of the conversation they're having in their head is already, he's a black guy.
Yes, yes.
And that's the first thing that pops in their head.
Right.
And I'm reminded of that in the movie. Well, one of the things that I feel blessed to be able to do is navigate in
Absolutely.
those waters.
Absolutely.
And in the work that I do, I remember I did a seminar once for men based on a book that I wrote called The New Conversation with Men.
Mm-hmm.
And all white guys.
Mm-hmm.
And when I walked up, I could sense the shock of the audience because they didn't know I was black.
Sure, sure.
And it's something intuitive that you just kind of feel. You just know.
So what are those feelings for you when those come up? I mean, what are you?
I'm like you. I'm so committed to my mission that I sometimes have those same types of conversations that you mentioned earlier. But I am so focused on what I'm about and what I'm doing that it doesn't bother me at all. As a matter of fact, I love it because the way I see it, I see myself as a representative. And I know is what I have is an opportunity to shatter the stereotypes that they have about us.
Absolutely.
And so when I get up there and I start doing my thing and all of a sudden they start seeing and experiencing Michael Taylor, not just a black guy, then everything shifts. Because there's a connection that we have as human beings that if we get out of our heads into our hearts and connect, color goes away. But you have to create a space for that to occur. And to create that space, you've got to have vulnerability, openness, compassion, and commitment to who you are in sharing yourself.
Absolutely, and I've seen you speak, live, and I've also seen your videos, and so I know that I could see how you hold that space, and it really becomes about, really what you want to give. Yeah. And when you move into that space of wanting to give, solely for the purposes of enhancing and contributing to someone's possibility, really all that other stuff becomes, background noise.
Yeah. And see, for me, it comes back or comes to purpose.
Yeah.
I believe every human being has a divine purpose. And I
Sure.
believe every human being is endowed with some unique gifts and talents. And when we can take those gifts and talents and share them with the world to make the world a better place, then we are on purpose. So for me, I am driven by that purpose. I am driven by that connection to something that is greater than myself, which I choose to call my source. I'm driven by my source moving through me. So when I'm giving a presentation, when I'm coaching, when I'm teaching, I recognize, and I say every time I give a presentation, I have a quick little prayer that I use, and I say, "Dear God, use me as an instrument of your peace, wisdom, and understanding." And I surrender to that.
Wow.
I surrender to that. And so that's why when I give presentations, it's like I get out of the way and I allow that source, that spirit to sort of move through me. And so that's why I don't get caught up into the environment and the people who may be, seeing me as a stereotype. I'm able to move past that because I'm so focused on being in service, sharing my gifts, that it's no longer an issue. Now, I've been doing this for a while.
Right.
So at the beginning, I remember having conversations in my little head about, white people crazy.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's exactly right.
I've had those thoughts because
Right.
listening to some conversations, I'm thinking, really, did you really just say that?
Exactly. But those are the things that, I mean, as you know, we're constantly having to do things where we do things that are breaking, the pattern of doubt, and those things are good ways to like break the pattern of doubt. I mean, like, I don't have a lot of discomfort with speaking to a bunch of white men, even if they're old, cranky white men. I don't mind. However, there were times when I had to give speeches to some very, very, very smart people, and I had doubt whether what I was delivering would be good enough, or whether it would stick. And so under those circumstances, I mean, you really do have to say to yourself, why am I here? I'm here to serve, to give, contribute. Even if I am the weakest link in the room, which I wasn't, by the way, but even if I was the weakest link in the room, if I'm giving, if this is surely my contribution because someone felt I should be here, then I'm good. But but still, your brain is constantly challenging. So I think for me, it's so funny that you mentioned that. If you don't mind me mentioning that, even if I go back to how I grew up, I grew up in a very kind of creative, middle class neighborhood. It was a mixed income community because you can have middle class blacks and doctors, but like the projects like two down the blocks, and you had cousins in those projects, and so it was very dynamic place where I learned about power, kind of grassroots power, kind of a different type of power. But then I would go to work, I would go to school where I was around institutional power, and institutional power meaning that, I had kids whose families were running CEOs of companies and whose fathers were governors and mayors and all that type of stuff. So I think for me, the whole issue around, being around a bunch of white folks, never really felt that uncomfortable because I think I've had the training. So yeah, but nonetheless, you find yourself around them, you can't help realize that I'm the only brother here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But if you don't mind me saying one more thing on this, I think one of the areas that did kind of stick to me, something I had to kind of work through, and that is that I remember being in environments, especially when I moved back to the Bay Area, and especially when I was hanging out, or I would meet with kind of foundations, kind of your kind of, and I'm not getting political here, but more of your liberal groups. And one thing I found was that when I was in these big foundations, like when I'm in a company, it's cool. The wolves are in the room, it, right? But when you're like in these foundations where everyone's kind of a little bit more passive aggressive, and you're literally seeing them play out. I saw situations where they were playing out stereotypes, and these were supposed to be the more conscientious people. And when I took a position that was kind of opposite of the stereotype, where I was to kind of fit into the kind of this structure, it made a lot of people feel uncomfortable, and it made me feel uncomfortable because even though I may have been there for the same reason, you had people who thought of me as kind of being more on the surrogate side instead of on kind of like the guy with the big ideas. Yeah. And so those were sometimes more challenging settings than to be in a place with a bunch of wolves.
Now, interestingly enough, again, I really believe in purpose and in that. And I was brought up in government housing all of my life. Most of the friends in my circle, were high school dropouts. I also was a high school dropout. But my mom taught me something when I was about 12, if I remember correctly. And I'll never forget it. And she used to always tell me a couple of things. Number one, she says, if you want something badly enough, no one can stop you from attaining it except yourself. First lesson she taught me.
Yep.
Another thing she taught me, though, was she said, Michael, this is what I want you to remember. Always walk in like you own the room.
Right.
Always, she says, what I mean by that is you got to walk in there with confidence.
Yeah.
Says, don't worry about the people in the room. You walk in there like you own it.
Yes.
And somehow that stuck with me. When she told me that, it sort of stuck with me. So I've always been this extroverted, outgoing type person. But what I recognize is that lesson really laid the foundation for me becoming a speaker.
Well, I'm going to take your, you know what? So you're, even though you grew up with your mom's wisdom showed up, you know, with me, because
Yeah.
I mean, I totally believe that. And that's what really allowed for me to actually show up.
Yeah. And as men of color, we must embrace that idea.
Yeah.
We got to walk in like we own the room. And so the reason that I do what I do is because, as I mentioned earlier, I take the responsibility of being a representative for Black men.
Absolutely.
Now, that may be a burden to some, but to me, I wear that proudly because I know that anytime I have an opportunity to speak and I change the mindset of people who don't look like me to get them to see who we really are,
Sure.
I've done my job.
I totally agree with you, man. Totally.
I've done my job. So
Yeah.
I embrace that. So
and you do it well, man. You do it well.
Yeah. And so as we start winding down, I want to focus now a little bit on one of the things that I really want to promote is entrepreneurship and empowering men of color to embrace this idea of entrepreneurship. So I want to ask you a few questions around becoming entrepreneurs. So first of all, you've launched companies. You talk to companies, you inspire them. So what are some of the obstacles you had to overcome to start your company? Some of the challenges.
Well, I think, you know, the first one is really feeling like you can find your market, that you know what your market is.
Okay.
Because a lot of the times we have these ideas, you know, in our head, and they're burning ideas. But really trying to find that market that's kind of like when the rubber hits the road. You know, it's when you really have to sit out there and, like, you know, do the grind, kind of work through and find you know who your people are. And I'm sure that you have, and if you haven't, read 1,000 True Fans by Kevin Kelly. If you have not, I highly recommend it. But you know what Kevin Kelly, who's the former editor of Wired magazine and has written several different books, what he says is that, you know, that all we need to do is to find 1,000 true fans. And the way we find 1,000 true fans, and these are people that will support you no matter, you know, I mean, no matter what you produce, they're going to support you. They're down with you. And if you find 1,000 true fans, you can make a living off of that, because these are people who, but part of that, he says, and find 1,000 true fans is like, how do you serve them? One way you serve them is by completely being who you are.
Yes. Absolutely.
And I think in entrepreneurism, because we're trying to find these markets, we will move away from who we are when we think that there is an opportunity in front of us that we've kind of ran into. And so we'll end up being someone else who we're not. And then what happens is you end up moving away from really what you have to give, the service that you truly have to give. So I think that's a critical for me in the entrepreneurial space. All
right. So what 3 things do entrepreneurs need to know to ensure their success? 3 things. What would be your 3 things every entrepreneur should know?
Well, once again, I'll start off with what do they have to give? How do they want to serve? What do they have to give to their community / customer? How do they want to have an impact on their community, on their customer? The second thing is, how do you access tools that allows for you to create the platform that can reach your customers? And I'm going to mention tools. I mention tools because in this economy that we live in now, the tools that we have available to us is more powerful and more accessible than what we can ever imagine for being an entrepreneur. So there's this other term that's called the zero margin economy. And what that means is that with the type of technologies that we have now, that the margin, it used to be that to open up a business, the margins were very high, and that's what actually kept people out of the market. But now, in a zero margin economy, whether that's the internet and the type of tools that we have, I can probably start off a shop and sell something on it before we got off this this conversation.
Sure.
And so the ability to use these tools and to have that be part of how you automate, how you find efficiencies, and how you communicate to your audience, so that you can develop those 1,000 true fans, is critical. So tools, I would say, is number 2. And then number 3, I would say, to know what you want to be as an entrepreneur. I mean, do you want to scale and be the biggest badass company, on earth? Do you want to be bold like that? Yes, which is great. It's you, and I'm fully in with you on that. But also, we should know that you don't have to always be the biggest badass company.
Yes, absolutely.
That based on 1,000 true fans, you could carve out a nice living for yourself. That's why I talk about talent as self-agency, because you could carve out a living for yourself with having almost where you don't have to be the multi-billion-dollar company. You can make a nice salary every year and be perfectly fine. But you have to know where you want to go with that and what you want to do with it. So those would be my 3.
Nice. So, man, time flies when you're having fun.
This is great, man. This is great. You got to have me back.
Absolutely. So I want to give you an opportunity for your closing thoughts. And again, I want you to speak directly to entrepreneurs. I know this show is about shattering stereotypes and blacking up, but I think it's important because I believe the key to our success is being entrepreneurs, controlling our own money. And again, I'm not saying we should be separate from anybody else, but taking advantage of all the opportunities that are out there. So I want you to speak directly to the entrepreneur who may be watching this and might be struggling with their business and maybe thinking about giving up. Right. What advice would you give to that guy who wants to be an entrepreneur, but unfortunately he's hit a wall, he's stuck, doesn't know what to do? What advice?
Well, first of all, I would say, as we all are at some point in this, and where we get stuck and have self-doubt, what I would tell them is to constantly hold the vision of a future. Imagine it, be mindful about it, meditate on it, see it, smell it, to hold that vision. And then understand that you have the capacity to be your own self-agent. That's my word. To be your own self-agent in this economy with that vision. And however you end up creating your entrepreneurial experience, whether it's based on what we just talked about, that small company that's sustaining you or being a bold multi-billion-dollar company, just understand that vision, that sense of purpose, hold that and nurture it. And everything else is around there for you. You could find everything. And then the other thing I would add to that as entrepreneurs is to be rigorous, meaning that there is nothing out there that you can't find an answer to. We're in a world where actually you can call someone, you can DM someone, you can Google, you could find out. I mean, I'm just amazed, even when I'm just trying to figure out how to use a tool now, how I can just put that in Google and the video pops up. And so there's a term that the guy named John Hagel and John Seeley Brown, they wrote a book together called Pull. It's one of my favorite books. And what that book talks about is that we're in a pull world where you can bring things to you based on a design, based on your own. You heard me use the word life world. Life world is about, what is your I hate to use these large terms, but what is your ontological design? What do you want for the world? Mm-hmm. And pull is about that. What do you want to pull towards you? And I say entrepreneurs, Black men, embrace that, because to be quite frank with you, the way the world moves is asking you to do exactly that, to take and pull something towards you, because that's what the economy gives us the opportunity to do.
Yeah, and the one thing that I would add to that is, if you're an entrepreneur and you're struggling, unsure, make sure you have a support system, a group of people that support, empowers, and challenges you to be your best self. It's imperative that we have, I don't want to call it a safety net, but having people in your life that can give you a different perspective of a situation that you may be in can help you see things from a different viewpoint. And I can't tell you how many times I've been stuck.
Yes.
And I've called a friend. I said, man, I'm just stuck right now. And then they'll say something, and I go, oh, I didn't think about that.
Yeah.
And I'm no longer stuck. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a network of people that's in your corner as an entrepreneur. So
it's absolutely critical, Michael. And I guess it's been about 15 years ago when I actually started up a firm. And I was at an incubator, and I was there alone. And the first couple of months, I actually struggled, even though I had entrepreneurs all around me. And I met a group of friends who are now like my brothers, who are running companies. And I started to grow. My business started to grow, mainly because of that level of support. And that group was so powerful that these are guys that we would even do interventions with each other. And so, if you saw that a guy that was kind of struggling, not getting business, you can kind of see that his attitude is changing, that his, you can just kind of feel it. It was no big deal for us to say, man, we got to go talk to so-and-so. And we would literally sit down in the room. And this is a great thing to see. When have you thought about 3 or 4 brothers sitting down and doing an intervention with another fellow brother to get him out of his space, that out of their funk? Mm-hmm. It's critical.
Yeah, and that's my work. Yeah. What I do is I challenge men to create a space where we get real. Yeah. And we get real about what's going on in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And so once again, it's important that you have a support system and also mentors.
Yep.
That you can learn from. So be open-minded to that. Well, I tell you, man, it's amazing how time flies. Wow. Yeah. So I'm going to give you an opportunity now to share with the audience how they can contact you if they want to get more information about you, learn about your company and things like that. So Let them know how they can find you.
Well, you have my website, which is which is ahmadmansur.com.
Spell that out, please.
That's AhmadMansur.com. And I don't mind giving my email. My email, which is a lot of different letters. It's AMANSUR@LMI.net. That's kind of a personal one that comes to me. And I'm available on Twitter. You can catch me on Twitter. That's about it right there.
And what I'll do is actually, next to the interview, I'll have your bio and I'll have links to your site. So
okay.
If you didn't catch his information, just look here on the page, right below the video here. You'll see all that contact information.
Right.
So Ahmad, I just want to say thank you, my man, for spending an hour with us. And once again, you are definitely shattering the stereotypes, and it has been an honor and a pleasure having you on the show.
Me as well, Michael, and thank you very much, and thank you for the great work that you're doing as well, man.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. Take care.
You got it.